Hi, hi.
Hi, Sandris.
Today, I will speak with Maja Bosnic about her piece com.app.data. Hi, Maja.
Hi, Sandris.
And just maybe can you just briefly give some short history of the piece? Who commissioned as a piece? And
Sure. Yeah. So the piece was initially commissioned by a duo from Serbia, Vladimir Blagojević, accordion, and Sasha Mirković, viola. So they commissioned the piece for their performance at the Tim Sonia Festival in Timisoara. And the original idea of the piece was to have musicians use free apps available to everybody that are on Google Store or Apple Store, and somehow employ possibilities they have while performing the piece. So it's sort of a piece with gadgets in a way, or some DIY live electronics, as if they're actually performing with the sounds and samples that apps make, and therefore it's a mixture of having a chamber duo piece with all these sounds on top between, and also being conducted by apps and directed by apps, recorded, replayed, and so on. So it's kind of a mix. I like to think of it as a mix of the world of concert stage music and humans on smartphones. So it's kind of a mix of these two worlds in this performance.
And maybe what is the main message, right, of the piece, or what would you like to communicate to the audience?
That's always a complicated question, because from one standpoint, well, I often like to show beauty and art and things we take for granted, or we don't find them as interesting, but are part of our lives and everyday lives. So in that sense, definitely use of smartphones has been used into this live art performance, and the use of smartphones has been scored, and use of these apps. And of course, I spent a couple of months researching all the apps that are available and selecting my own options, what can be used for the piece. And therefore, certain apps were especially important in creating the material of the piece for the instrumentalist, because certain samples from the apps have been then transcribed into the score that musicians are playing. So I guess what I'm trying to, what kind of question I guess I'm opening. I always like to prefer that I'm just opening questions and I'm not actually stating a message. So perhaps just given a question, what could we do more, and how playful and creative everyday life can be if you use your imagination and devote some time to it. And there's, I think, in most of my pieces, there's also, I hope, this message that perhaps there's an artist in everybody, as in there's also a performer in the audience and a creator in the audience potentially. So I guess those would be the first questions you would think. Why are phones on stage, and why are the apps music now? And, you know, I can do that, you know, from a seat point in a way. But of course, it from the technical creator's point, it's very controlled in other ways, because it's very much scored. It's very decided what app, what settings in the app, how you use it, when you start it, when you play it, and in correlation with what's written in the score for your instrument at the same time. So it's very thought of. It's not free improv or anything. It's very, it's a completely scored piece. which is another way of me saying that these apps that are, some of them are completely funny, some of them are in the first glimpse perhaps useless. Why would you even have these apps? Some of them are really really strange, and this is exactly why I wanted to have a bigger use of them and have them very important for this piece, you know. So there's a bit of this twist as well.
As I understand, right, in this piece, one of, let's say, agents, right, beyond musicians are apps, right? App becomes some kind of musical agent, but what
Yes.
kind of agent it becomes? It becomes more like a composer, or it more like musician, or what role plays these apps in your piece?
They are definitely ready-mades that I am using and constructing into my own piece language and, you know, communication. But they do different things inside the piece. Sometimes they're purely just decoration. Some other times they are giving a source for the material.
By decoration,
yeah.
By decoration, what do you mean? It's just visually, right? Or
just visually, the beginning of the piece is just apps doing the strobe lights with musicians opening the piece without the apps making sounds. But then further on from that point, you realize that whatever musicians have been playing until that point has actually been extracted from the samples from another app. And then you get to hear the actual samples from the app. So you have a mixture of the actual sounds from phones, as well as musicians transcribing them and copying them. Then later on, you also have the app conducting musicians, some part of musicians. There are breathing coaches that are directing musicians with some visual circles, like how much sounds they produce. There's a Kegel exercise that coaches musicians how long they produce a sound and when they stop with ringings and stoppings. There's a recording app that records the entire ensemble at a certain point, and then after a while, each one of the players replays the recording with different filters, alterations, and voices. So in the end, you have a big mixture of all these recordings of the players on top of them playing go together. So yeah, there's also a wonderful game that certain performers are playing, and then this just sort of like a mind game, logical game that makes wonderful little sounds and bings and bells, and they play to level 12, and level 12 gives a major scale, so it's sort of like a big finishing with this video game. So there's all these worlds of apps when we use them for health, because there's a breathing coach and Kegel exercises. When we use them for fun, with pop culture, with samples from movie trivia and movie themes and sound effects. There's also world of apps where you use video games for your own relaxations with sounds used in them as well. And there are the apps that actually are perhaps most let's say musical, in a way that they actually record musicians and then produce recordings either backwards or with other filters. So in this whole piece, you sort of have a showcase of different types of apps that we use every day, that are made on the market, that are free for everybody, and then we use them to perform the piece. And I use them, first of all, to decide how to compose the piece with all of them, which one, when, how they crossfade, and you know.
And I noticed the piece is around 9 minutes long, right?
Yeah.
And what is like a dramaturgy of the piece? How many parts, or what is the internal logic?
There's 4 here. Let me. I think there are 4 parts, as far as I remember. Yes, there are 4 parts. And what I really like about this piece is that it is open to be performed by any performance, any musicians, any ensemble. and it can go from duo up to whatever the number of musicians you have. But basically, the initial score offers a couple of sounds that musicians have to learn. I can just demonstrate shortly.
Okay.
So these icons need to be arranged by the ensemble. There are, I don't know, 9 of them. And so the idea is that any ensemble that decides to play this piece can download the app, listen to the sounds, and come up with their own transcription or interpretation or imitation of these 9 sounds that the apps make. So in this way, I also like to feel like I'm collaborating with the ensemble, and they can also show off, so to make their own best impersonation of these sounds. And sometimes, you know, I can imagine people saying, oh, I prefer how this ensemble did this piece. They really did this portal sound more true, and so on. So this is kind of a little bit of creation I'm opening to ensembles. But the actual score looks like this. So the ensemble has a real time going, and then the icons, and they know they have 4 roles in the ensemble, so they can divide the ensemble by these 4 lines they're following, and they're just reading the icons according to the real time. And sometimes they're performing as an ensemble together, sometimes they're spread apart, sometimes some of them are actually performing the app with playing actual samples, original samples from the app.
This is a decision made by performers, or it's very structured and prescribed by you?
The arrangements, I did arrangements myself for a couple of ensembles. I did it for a quartet, for Klangforum Wien, and for my own ensemble in Serbia, Zabuna, for sextet, and for duo initially. So maybe you can see a glimpse. This is the actual score of the icon, how it looks and how it's scored. So in the score, you can find the actual arrangement and the scoring of all these sounds.
Can you go through each part and tell a little bit about each? Is it 4 parts, right? Yeah,
sure. So the first part, like I said, is introduction, where you just hear the sounds from the app. That's the part 1. You're listening to the sounds from the app coming from the musicians.
So music,
just flashing.
So correctly understand that these are sounds from the apps, right? And what is the role of musicians there? So they just
they are reinterpreting the apps.
Oh, got it.
Sounds from the apps, but we do not yet know the apps. So the piece starts from with musicians performing the set of sounds. I mean, the whole score is composed with these collage of these sounds, the way I wanted it to be, and the way I wanted to introduce this. So and it's so often perplexed. So sometimes, you know, it's not so clear what kind of sounds are yet happening, what kind of samples, and then slowly after a minute and a half, you get to hear first actual sound from the app, and then later on you start to realize that actually everything you have been hearing is something that's been taken from these sounds that later on reveal themselves.
Okay, the first part is like introductional part, right? So so that you have some kind of library of
samples,
sounds,
and then
and musicians are performing, and gradually apps you just take from apps some sounds.
Yes, exactly. So gradually musicians sort of do this fade into the app sounds. They introduce them, and then slowly you realize it's apps, and then apps mix with musicians. That's the first part. Then the second part, the ensemble starts to sort of mix with other apps. So some part of the ensemble starts playing a video game with these wonderful sounds. The other part of the ensemble gets to play the breathing coach app that is conducting their breathing or airy noises that they're making with their instruments. No matter what the instruments they do, they're trying to produce white noises according to the app that is just basically showing them on their phones, showing them this little circle that's just widening and narrowing in all the time. So they just need to follow their apps. And of course, what I really like about this, it can be quite random, because of course not all phones and not all apps start at the same time. So if you have two musicians doing the breathing section with their apps are not going to be contacting them in sync. So it's going to be a bit dissolved in this way, which is what I really like about this as well. As the same thing with the video game app. In my ensemble, we had 2 musicians playing the video game app. So you had all these random, wonderful little bings and clicks and visuals of whatever the app is doing, and it's not synchronized. So you have kind of like these 2 layers of environments that are happening, these bings and clicks from the video game, and then you have this breathing that's going on, while in the middle, 2 sections of musicians are going completely into the phones. So now the phones are solo and they're just playing the samples completely.
Yes, got it. But it's on the second section, or it's on the...
It's the second section.
It's the second part, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, got it.
Actually, it's the ending of the first part. Sorry, it's the ending of the first part. Second section is where everybody is conducted by one musician looking at one person's app, and they're doing the section level 1, session 2 of Kegel exercises.
Yes.
So Kegel exercises are physical exercises for people and with incontinence problems or something like that, where they need to squeeze for a certain amount of seconds and then they release, and then they squeeze and rest, and so on. But musicians here, they produce sounds when the app is dictating squeeze, and of course every time the timing of how long the sound is taking is directly by the app. So first it's 4 seconds, 5 second rest, and it's 4 seconds, 5 second rest, and then it starts prolonging the duration of the sound and shortening the rest until the end, when everything is very short squeeze, short rest. So we have the entire ensemble finally in sync together and listening to the signs and pings of the app and seeing green or red lights. Also, the audience gets to see this. And so everybody's devoted to following the exercises that the app is directing. Also, one interesting thing about this part is there is a treadmill app that is basically that. You open your phone and there's a small little treadmill that people usually use to practice walking and cardio exercises, but here you sort of do a finger exercise. So it's a ridiculous funny app where you're pretending your fingers are, you're exercising, and it creates wonderful sounds of machinery. And it's very difficult. It needs some practicing to know when to stop it and how to stop it and how to start it with your fingers. So one section of musicians needs to also practice this app to start it with the Kegel exercises. So with all the musicians performing noisy mixture of sounds for the amounts of squeezes in the app, one section of musicians needs to learn to run the treadmill and stop it when there's the rest. So it's again a mix of noises coming from actual acoustic instruments as well as some smartphone recorded sounds.
Third part?
Third part is the recording session. So we have 2 recording bits. First one is one section of musicians using play backwards app that simply records whatever you play and then it just plays it backwards. And the other larger section of musicians are using voice changer app. So first off, we have musicians who have a play backwards app record section of musicians who are again doing the breathing app with white noises. So they're recording the white noises and for 8 seconds, and then they start playing backwards the recorded white noises from the ensemble live on the stage. After that, the rest of the ensemble is prepared to in sync record everybody together playing certain set of synchronized jingles from the first initial app and samples. on the voice changers. So the large section of ensemble records the entire ensemble playing the jingles, the changes, all the samples together in sync finally. The moment they stop this, I don't know, minute-long run of samples together, they each play their own recordings from their phones with different kind of filters. Some have, I don't know, optimum robots. Some have chipmunks, really fast speed, high pitch playbacks. Some have drunk, some have low battery. So towards the recording is slowly dying off and slowing down and losing pitch and so on. So all these different types of recordings are being replayed for the final section, for the section 4. So the third section was the recording bit.
Yes,
and then yes, and from the playbacks, when everybody starts playing back, we begin the part 4 of the piece, and that's when on top of these playbacks, musicians also perform the score. Again, the actual signs for different sounds they're making and parts they're playing, mixed with samples until the end. So it's kind of like going back to the materials that we started from, but this time it's also mixed with it being recorded and replayed back. On top of it, we play them again in different orders, different ways, and different manipulations, perplexions, and so on, until everything dies off completely, all the recordings and the score. And then we just wait for the ending in silence. And there's this final sample, very cheesy one, going ta-da, like the big C major chord.
So you have four sections, four parts. First part, like summary, how I understand. First part, it's more about samples.
Yes.
Second is more about when app become agent.
Yes. Directing. Yes.
Directing. The third part is about recording, and fourth is playback, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what is a sensorial experience, right? You said, because you mentioned that there are visual, and I saw as well there are some visual experience as well. What's the idea of all this sensorial experience? What kind of experience, sensorial experience, you wanted to brought for a viewer of the piece?
For the you mean the actual experience when you're witnessing the piece, or do you mean just the sound?
When you're witnessing the piece, because the piece is both,
when
right?
You're at the performance and witnessing the piece.
The piece is both. It's about both about listening and about seeing, right?
It is, yes. Although it has been performed several times without the visual, and it still works. Of course, it's best. I mean, whenever I'm composing, directing the sounds, designing the sounds, making sculpture out of sounds is my main satisfaction. So even when I'm using apps and videos or whatever, the sound result is my main priority always. So things work without videos, of course. They're differently perceived. You're more focused on the recognizing the samples in the instruments, if at all or not, and then this mixture that's becoming, and then hearing the sounds that are being very technical from the apps and the bings, the clicks, everything else, and mixing this with instruments. So also the recordings, it's in this way, it's also very interesting because you focus more on these mixtures that come together in the overall soundscape and the result. However, when we also manage to project all our apps, all our phones, and then the audience gets to see behind us on the screen what every phone is doing and what's actually happening. So they also get to see our fingers touching what samples, and then hearing what's going on, and seeing what we're being directed by the visuals we see. In that sense, it's definitely more playful. It's more explanatory. as the one without the visual perhaps is more abstract, but it's more sound focused. But when we have it with visuals, then it's a kind of like an open play. It's also an open score. So the audience also gets to see what's going on, what we're communicating with, why we're reacting a certain way,
Yes.
and what we're doing. And in that sense, it's kind of becoming quite transparent, and it's showing this world that I think belongs to everybody, not just trained musicians that are on stage, but also everybody in the audience knows the apps, knows the phones, can imagine themselves doing this. And like I said, having this subliminal little open communication with the world outside of just trained musicians and contemporary music niche is always something I'm very interested in. And I really find it thrills me a lot to find these ways of communicating and opening and seeing how things can communicate wider than just trained musicians and composers.
Got it. And how many apps are involved in the piece?
How many apps? Let me count. There should be. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 apps. 9 apps.
And as I understand, most of them are not apps meant for music, right?
No, no.
Or can you release what kind of say what kind of apps you use and how you choose them?
Yes, absolutely. You can also find a list and download links on my website if you just go to my website /com.app.data with dots between. But like I said, breathing coach, video game, Kegel exercises, treadmill, finger exercises are not musical apps at all. In fact, I mean, 100 Sound Buttons app, that is the one with icons and different sound samples. I'm not sure if, I mean, to me, it's musical because I'm into sounds and I'm into all sorts of sounds, using them for music. I'm not sure it's made to be musical. It's just made for fun. So kids or whoever can maybe have an applause or, you know, like a fireworks sounds or whatever they want to play with, replayed from their phone. So there are sounds of whales, certain portal, I don't know, chewing an apple or whatever. So it's a mixture of sound buttons that people can use for whatever they want to. I'm not sure what, but in real life, but obviously there is this app. So I guess people play somehow with it. I'm not sure if it's musical because it's not an instrument, but to me, it's almost as an instrument because I have this resource of sounds.
Got it.
And also the 2 recording apps that that I think are mostly also used for fun. I mean, the entire, it's also interesting to see how this entire app market, of course, goes for clicks and it needs to be interesting and amusing in a way or useful, you know. So either it's funny, or it's very useful. It's for your health, it's training you, it's calming you down, you know, it's occupying you and so on. And so these recording apps, they are very recording apps, although recording is a musical thing, but these don't feel like they're actually made for musicians. The Play Backwards app is simply there for people who, you know, speak so they can hear themselves speaking backwards, as well as the Voice Changer Effect app, the one that everybody uses in the end with all different voices replayed. It's mostly for speech, as it's for phones. So it's mostly for people speaking or perhaps singing at most musically, that it's made for, that the apps are made for, so that when they record themselves, they can hear themselves speaking like a squirrel or like a Optimum robot or like a monster, you know. But we use this for recording and replaying our musical parts. So we hear instruments being filtered to sound like monsters or squirrels or whatever. So yeah, I don't think any of these apps are actually musical or made for music, like I said, but they can be used. I mean, I'm trying to prove they can be used in music in many ways.
Yes, got it. And what was the process of composing, right? How long it take and what stages you go through, right?
Well, where should I begin with? I already had stepped into the smartphone world before this piece. So I already had a piece with smartphones in one musician's hand, with musicians just staring at smartphones and only playing with one hand, whatever they're playing, you know. I already had this piece and I was still very much interested in having these everyday humans with phones on stage. And also going furthermore more into this world of phones and what we have there, not just for funny looks of musicians with phones on stage, but having more use of it and seeing what it can do for musicians. So that was the first idea. I wanted to see what more can I extract from the smartphone world for my music. And then I just went researching the world of free apps. I really wanted them to be free apps. I could have organized designing my own app for this piece or whatever, but that was not a point. I really wanted to work with everyday ready-mades that everybody can access, and that the audience after the performance can go and like, I want this video game, where can I download it, you know, or I want to record myself this way. So and that's why I really wanted to use free apps that everyone can access, and then of course credit the creators of the apps in my score and everywhere else. So so yes, I researched the apps. I started downloading tons of apps, trying them out, seeing what they can do, seeing what sounds they make, if I like them or not. And initially I made my selection. I also realized the categories of the apps that are there. Like I said, there are ones that decorate, that just play lights, different colors. There's the ones that play sounds, ones that record and edit sounds, and ones that can conduct in many ways the performance. And then I made my own selection between all these apps, try to find the best examples of each that I can use and also like the sounds. And then I made the selection of these 9 apps that I'm going to use. Then I continue thinking and imagining the world of sounds and musicians and instruments, how they can work together. Then where can I mix them? And that's how I decided that initially I'm going to use this selection of sound samples that I decide from this app, and then I'm going to arrange it for the instrumentalists, but then again break them apart in their own parts and ways and make it way complex before we get to actually hear the sounds and so on. I think I spent about 2 months researching the apps and making my selection, and then part by part slowly developed. And it also changed with many performances because I was involved. And I was always open to collaborate and experiment with musicians. So the first performance for Vladimir and Sasha in 2018 in November, it was completely scored. Everything was scored. Like you did not get these tables with just sounds. Everything was scored. You could see from what sample their parts are coming, but it was completely scored in music states. And then the second time around at the festival Impulse in Graz in 2019 in February, I worked with 4 percussionists, and with them we worked more like a workshop. We tried to make new arrangements of these sound samples they're using. We added another section with just the treadmill being played by everybody with different rhythmical patterns. And then the next time around, Klangforum Wien quartet played at Mykonos. For them, it was already this final version of the score that you see today. But I did write them their own parts in the pre-section. So they do have a score. The only difference is that the instrumental parts that they need to memorize these 9 samples to play by heart from the memory whenever they see the icon in the score. So the preparation is learning all these icons by heart and then reading them from the score when they start performing together. And since then, since June 2019, it's been in this structure. After that, I also had a accordion duo perform the piece from this latest score. And even though there are 4 parts in the score, they play the first main 2, and then it absolutely works just as well. So, and the piece is also called ever-changing piece for 2 groups of musicians with phone apps. And the idea of this is because I also need to recheck every time somebody performs the piece if the apps are still available, if it's still the same version of the app, if I need to, tell them if they need to find a different version. We had issues with strobe apps, the lights, the flashing lights, the least important apps in the piece, because they're just reacting to musician sounds in front of them, like strobes. But they keep changing. And for instance, we always need to find a new one, that can do this for the performance. So yeah, that's how the whole process worked, really.
So, right, as I understand, at the beginning was ideas, then it was researching stage, right? Basically, it means, and when you research apps, right? When you research apps, understand what kind of apps, what kind of functions could selected the apps. Then, based on what you selected, you wrote 4 parts, and then there was performances, right? And and this during the performances, like 3 or 4 right stages, this piece evolved, right? So each what was the main, let's say, trigger to evolvement? What is it? It was work with performers, or it was just you listen to the piece and you say, okay, my imagination needs something else, and
well, I forgot to mention, during the composing process, after the research and then writing down, I always make mock-ups. So
sorry, what do you mean by mock-ups?
Mock-ups, I mean making an audio remake of the piece before I ever hear it. So I work in my software, and I compose the piece entirely from the point where I want, where is the instrument playing the sample, where you have the actual sample, where you have this section. And I always do this, it's perhaps too controlling, but I really like to make sure everything's the way I want it. Every sound is where I want it. And, so the piece was completely composed in detail with all these sounds. Nothing is, even though, when you think of apps and buttons, nothing is improvised. Everything is scored. So musicians actually also needed to practice, like switching from certain page of the sound buttons to the other, so they can actually do this set of buttons in time, So everything is very, in that sense, quite traditionally musically scored.
Yes.
The entire use of apps and instruments. So everything is composed in detail. The only differences that it made was trying out some new sections, putting inside some new sections, elaborating a bit more at some points for the next 2 performances. And then we tried and we gave up and so on. It was a bit more open, like if we can add something more or less, when we had like 4 percussions and a big set, timpani, vibraphone, marimba, and everything else, or, Also, it was changing. The setting of the piece was also very changing a lot from the first performance, where musicians were. It was just a duo, so in the center between musicians, you would see their 2 smartphones, and then the musicians on the side turning their backs to the audience. So you see their smartphones, how they use them, and they have their score in front of their heads. So, and then we also had a camera that was projecting these two phones largely on screen. So audience could see how they close the app, open another app, do this, do that. For the performance, for the next performance in Impulse, we had a great advice by Simon Loeffler, who you probably know likes building his own instruments and working with everyday objects and materials. And he told me, like, why can't smartphones be instruments on their own? I really, you know, and I thought, yeah, that would be amazing. That's what they are. I'm not sure how to make them another instrument, you know. And then I found microphone stands and smartphone stands. So every smartphone was on a big stand, you know, with having entity and stability. And so next to percussions, you would, and their score holders, you would also see like smartphones being standing up on the microphone stands, high and proud. So that was another thing we tried, and it worked really well. But all these technical production-wise, technical equipment issues are not always working in all places, in all stages, in all venues, but it's very adaptable. It can, we always make it work in some other ways. And those are the things that sometimes change.
Got it. So, so let's understand there are several triggers, right? One trigger is that just, let's say, first it was for other instruments and it was percussionists and etc. And it evolved, right? So you need just you just naturally you need to adapt the piece, right, to be more, yes, let's say, universal, that it could be performed by, yes, more. Second, right, is trigger. It's like just you show the piece, you understand, and somebody, like you said, Simon, thought, okay, you can use that, and it enhance the feedback. And enhance your imagination, what you can do with the piece, which is an interesting process as well. And the third, which would be interesting, is for me as well to hear, what do you think, how musicians or how performers, right, and how collaboration with them impacted or shaped the piece?
I would like to think that they feel they have a lot of space in there. I remember when I rehearsed this piece with my ensemble in 2019, we needed a lot of rehearsals, and it's a big shift for them because they're not reading a score. It's a mind game. They have an icon. They need to remember what the score is for this icon, and then they play their thing. Or it says an icon and then just says the last third of that. And so it's very it's very mind challenging. It's kind of like a mind game when you play this piece, and it was very interesting for them as well because it's a challenge. It's also a game in a way. Every time they play it, it's a different way of performing, and also what I think it relates to most of my pieces is that in chamber music, you rarely get to have how should I say, focus on certain instruments. It's quite often an ensemble together all the time in different masses, in different situations, in different masses, I mean sound masses, in different textures. And even when I worked with the Baroque ensemble in 2017, I remember Hapsikotis told me, we never play this way. I don't have to think about my line, but I always have to think about the entire sound we make together. As what is the sound texture suitable? Is it working? And so everybody's kind of out of their instruments and out of their own role for the entire sound result. And I like this. I think that's how I think about music anyway. That's how I perform music too. So in this piece, when you initially start preparing this piece, each one of them gets a lot of space and feels free to also suggest and come up with new ways of creating certain sounds or samples. You know, we all do this. Even though I have an arrangement and I can tell them, you just do this, you just do this, you just do this, you know, and this is how you play this fireworks app or a jingle or whatever. But still, what we do is always we together listen to the sample several times, and then we look at the arrangement, and then we replay it. And after it's working, we have it together. Then we listen again, and they often come up with some another effects they can do to make it even more sound like the sound from the app. And this is what I really like, because it is kind of different than just giving them the complete score. I mean, they have the complete score, but when they actually get to see these icons in the score, I think that mentally they feel a bit more free they're taking it from their mind, not from the paper I wrote. So they have to extract it from their mind at the time, at that very second, at that moment, and it gives them a bit more their own signature, I'd like to think.
What kind of hardware you use in the piece?
We have, aside from apps, we have to connect every smartphone to a Bluetooth speaker. So every musician has a smartphone with all these apps and a Bluetooth speaker. And we always make sure that we hear Bluetooth speakers as loud as the ensemble. So they're equally leveled. So you get to hear these smartphone apps sounds as loud as whatever we're playing on stage live. That's the first thing. So we have as many Bluetooth speakers as many musicians. So and smartphones.
Okay, so first, right? Yeah. So I'm a musician. I have my own instrument. I see the score, and I have a smartphone, right?
Smartphone. You download the apps.
Yes, I download the app.
Or tells you where to.
Yes.
And then you open the apps. First, you have to listen to these samples. You read your score. You see the arrangement for your instrument. You see what's your part in there. You listen to the sample. You realize what's your role in the sample and what kind of effect part of the sample you're assigned to, and then you memorize. So then that's the initial part where you learn the score, you realize the score, and then you have to just memorize it, and then you read the score all the way through with your smartphone, opening apps, closing apps, playing the instrument.
Okay.
And yeah.
And what else hardware you have? You have a projector, right? Or
we have a projector, and that we have we usually work with an audio video tech person who is helping us project at least 4 smartphones on the screen. Even though we're often 6 and 7 people, but there are 4 lines and 4 different scores for smartphones as well. So at least they get to see these 4 different smartphones performing on top of musicians, together with musicians. So we have the 4 smartphones projected on the screen.
And there are like person who is mixing or how it works?
No. We just set up smartphones projecting, and everything else is live.
Okay, so so there is no person who switch. Okay, there is visual from that person.
No. The point is that you get to see all the phones, whatever they're doing together. You get to see that this one's playing this, while this one is flashing, and then this one is playing a video game, and then this one is recording something. So you get to see all these 4 different lines in smartphones happening parallel to musicians. So musically wise, besides the Bluetooth that are just there for smartphones being as loud as instruments, the Bluetooth speakers, aside from that, I mean, everything is live, even the smartphones. And you even get this little latency, because often smartphones to Bluetooth speaker sometimes have a very short latency. So we even incorporate this as well.
Got it. And non-visual, how it's connected? So you do, how you connect this apps with screen?
And the screen?
Yes, because as I understand, right, the screen shows what's going on in the apps, right?
Yes, exactly. The screen is just being a live stream of 4 smartphones on stage. So it is just a window to show audience what's actually going on with smartphones.
Okay, so you have, so you take a stream from my and from, for example, if I would be from me and from
Yes.
for 3 more musicians.
Yes.
Somehow go through the, I don't know, some virtual
Yes, from the
server or
server, and then video projecting software, and then it goes on the screen on stage.
Got it.
So yes, and of course we how shall I say this? We take care of our phones for the performance. We need to have a black wallpaper and make sure we have a screen with just these apps for the performance. No kids photos and things like that,
Right.
and then. And the entire setup of the phone is also a bit extensive. If I said it right, you need to worry about if it's on flight mode or if it's on Wi-Fi, and if it's on our server, and if it's, you know, so. But yeah, then again, if the thing with the free apps is also very interesting to me is that quite often you have an ads popping up, and sometimes we just wonder, like, what if that happens? What do we do during the performance? You know, you're playing and then you have the app that's screaming something or somebody speaking, and I always think, like, that's great, you know, that's
Yes.
exactly what this is.
Yes.
It's free
Yes.
apps, and that happens, and just keep it going, close it, continue, you know, it's fine.
And software, what kind of software you use?
At that time I used Logic to do my the mock-ups, like I said, the audio realizations, digital realizations, you know, the remakes, pre-makes of the piece, actually, because it's before it's performed even. Kind of a test for the piece. I used to make it in Logic. Now I use Ableton for everything, Ableton Live. Yeah, but I mean, those are very, one can make it in many different softwares, you know, it's very straightforward. And what I do then is I do my own recordings of these sounds that instruments are making, either with my own secondhand instruments that I have, or I create samples in Ableton, or I often take sounds from YouTube as well, which is a great resource just for my mock-ups, you know, just so I can have the actual picture of everything that's going to really sound-wise happen at in certain moments. So yeah, I just create my own collage, sort of like a musique concrète, you know, just create the actual version of the piece before I do the score. So I completely compose the sound world and audio, let's say, of the piece and the results that I want to hear before I do the score. That's what I usually almost always do.
So this is interesting, what you said. So you use this ideas of musique concrète, right? So this is one of, let's say, compositional principles. What other compositional principles are employed in this piece?
Let me see. Let me think. I do feel there's a lot of game elements into it. You know, there's a lot of even though everything is scored, there are still so many spaces for random, unplanned events.
Yes.
Which kind of gives it like a tiny layer, a veil of aleatoric possibilities. Yes. You know, something that's framed into options. Certain amounts of things can happen in certain ways, but it's not scored. And it's something I really like about this piece. Also, that there's this freedom of interpretation. So you have the actual arrangement and the score. You have written out what you should do with your instruments for this when you see this icon. But also, if you have a better idea, please, you know, you can do you do it. You know, if you're interested and inspired, and you like this sound sample, and you know how to do it even better, sure. You know, you just there's this. So it's still a bit of sort of almost like a text score. You know, yes. You have the idea I want, the idea of the sound I want. And in case you prefer having it old school written out, you have it. But in case you want to interpret it yourself, you can also do it. So
got it.
Yeah.
And right, you said that you can imagine the piece without visual part, right?
Yeah, it has been performed several times without the visual part.
Can you imagine the piece where apps are not performing?
But the apps are not performing. No. I mean, the apps are a core element of the piece. I can imagine piece being performed with just the apps, without the instruments, but not the other way around.
Can you elaborate on idea how the piece would look like or sound like?
Yes, I mean, it would
without instruments, right? You said without real instruments.
It would be like an audio piece. You would have 4 musicians, or maybe 2 would be enough for this, if it's just the apps, who would simply just play the samples, the actual samples from the beginning. Then when they go to the samples slowly on their own, even the line of the samples in the score already is slowly going from accidental, random, to having a line. So a certain order of them appearing and slowly forming a certain line or patterns that keep then repeating, kind of like a chorus of a line of the samples you get to hear. That would be the first section. Then the second one, when they have Kegel exercises, we would just have a minute of listening different kinds of bings between 4-second silences, or 3, 2, which is also something I like as well, a bit of John Cage in between. And then you get the recording part, where something would have to be recorded or pre-recorded or taken from the audience, and then replayed as it's scored already in different filters, different ways of replaying until the end. So I can also imagine that happening, although I prefer it the way it is, because it's a whole experience, having instruments and musicians on stage on top. But I could not be done with just musicians, because they need to be conducted by the apps at some points.
Can you imagine the piece with apps but without musicians?
Without musicians?
Yeah. Apps,
yes.
But like apps plays on its own, like yes. But without musicians are playing buttons.
Yes. Yes. Not as interesting, if you ask me. But yeah, it could be done. Yeah.
And last question. What are, let's say, the 3 main learnings, right? What you learn during composing the piece, performing, improving, etc. What would be very important maybe to know to somebody who would like to create his or her piece, using apps, mobile apps?
Okay, technical issues that we went through that could maybe be useful to others to be prepared and know is of course always what type of phone everybody has. If it's iOS or is it Android, and what apps work where. We had usually iPhones are more difficult to work with than Android, and there are less apps for them. Sometimes all these free apps versions are not created for iPhones. That sometimes we had issue of finding alternative. So finding the voice changing recorder that's similar, that has similar effects, offers, but it's not exactly the same one, but does the same thing, and it's for the iPhone. And specific version of the iPhone that's at the moment that musician had. So iPhones are complicated. Still, we can manage and work around it, but that was a bit an issue that we had. also with the iPhone, sometimes there's this extra security issue where certain apps would not play through Bluetooth speakers, because there are some permissions that need to be done by the phone, and it's more complicated than what users can adjust. Apparently, it needs some developer level settings done upon the device, so that we could have Bluetooth speakers play what the phone is playing. And that's an issue, because we need Bluetooth speakers to play in order to hear them as loud as all the instruments and all the other smartphones on stage. So that's the first technical issues that we first have. When we meet, when we start performing the piece, let's see our phones, let's see what we can do. And sometimes because of this, then we have to change who is reading what line in the score. Perhaps if we initially thought differently and now we see that we cannot make it together with the phone, then we just switch places so that it can all work. That's the first technical issue. The second one is that even though this piece is scored under the real timeline, I try not to do it with stopwatch, because as soon as everybody just learns the samples and just keep flowing one after the other and keep running and relying on the feeling of the time that's passing by, it's much better, much easier, much less stressful for them than having a stopwatch. So that's also one thing that I removed after 2 performances, the stopwatch, because it's quite easily to learn, and then everybody sees what's going on and they know where they are and keep going. So the time, even though it's written out, the real time, it's a bit flexible, as long as everybody's just in tune and seeing where they are. Working with phones. What else? I don't know. I think that those are the main issues. The other thing is just making sure you do your research. You make sure you know what the apps really do, how they do, and also, as always, really detailed score with instructions, how to prepare, what to do, how to set up your phone, what to take care of, and how to prepare the score, how to prepare for reading the score before reading the score. So yeah, those are the main issues with working with smartphones and apps.
So thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you. Thank you.